Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first Arcview Access event for 2021. All I can say is, wow, what a year so far, right? I'm actually excited to read the news again, along with all the other amazing progress we are seeing in cannabis. As a result, I have my word for the year, and that is momentum. Just this month, we've experienced momentum on a number of fronts. Arizona started their adult use program within just a few months of passing in November, the fastest go-to-market we have ever seen. Way to go, Arizona. Chuck Schumer, our newly installed Senate Majority Leader, reiterated that marijuana reform will be a legislative priority for his chamber as the session ramps up. Of course, we have Vice President Harris as the deciding vote, should that be needed, and she has already come out as a strong cannabis supporter. Another momentous trend that I think is inspiring for me is our public cannabis stocks. And I'd like to take just a second and give a shout out to my mom and say, okay, you were right. What I mean by that is my mom said to me in December of last year that I should buy Tilray. And of course, like a good daughter, I ignored her advice. I won't be doing that again. Tilray, as many other public cannabis stocks, has seen a nice lift in their stock price in this past month, going from $8.56 a share on December 28th to $19.52 today. Folks, that's a 128% return in 1 month. Okay, Mom, you were right. We have an incredible show for you today. And for those of you with a cannabis business, an investment in cannabis, or ready to now take the leap and jump into this industry, you cannot ignore the fact that we are on a pretty fast track to federal legalization. And I'm going to ask you, are you ready? This is our first in a series of shows that we will be doing on this topic because, let's be honest, it is very important. And our next one will be a showcase at South by Southwest. So make sure you tune in for that one too. Before I pass the mic over, I'd like to give a shout out to our new Arcview Alliance program and our partners. Many of us in the industry have decided to get together, not only to work together, but to support our community and programs like this one. So today it is my honor to recognize 3 of our Alliance partners. Transact First, who is by far the best payment processor out there. Alpha Root, providing much needed insurance coverage, and ProClinical, who provides top talent in the cannabis and life science space. We appreciate our Alliance partners and also our sponsor today, who is Direct to Technology. So to dive in a little bit more with Joe Garrett from Direct to Technology, I'd like to bring on Jake Kuzerak, our VP of Business Development here at the Arctic Group. Okay, Jake, let's go create some momentum together.
Sounds like a plan, Kim. And Joe, it's great to see you again. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sponsoring and for joining us today. Now, I know our audience would love to hear this straight from the horse's mouth. I say that because you're from Texas. But please give us the full rundown on Direct to Technology and the services you provide for the cannabis industry.
Yeah, we're a full-service managed network service provider, also known as an MNSP. We provide professional network design, deployment, and management services to protect you and your business from external threats. Our network design and monitoring includes web filtering, auto VPN, broadband, and managed Wi-Fi in a competitive package. Your typical internet gateway is either not configured properly or it isn't properly maintained. There's a group of people that are constantly looking for opportunities to compromise your business. Phishing, malware, ransomware, spoofing, viruses. It's like they make up something new every day. For example, on a recently installed network, we ran an internal scan and found over 2,000 vulnerabilities. At the end of the day, we had it down to 0, and our service will help keep it that way. Also, our solutions are payment card industry compliant. When the federal government starts to respect cannabis retailers or legitimate businesses, our customers will benefit from being compliant day one. If you aren't compliant, you're open to punitive charges from the credit card companies. Finally, we're a full-service technology provider. A lot of providers don't want to be in your stores and stop at the gateway. We're a complete solution provider. Networking, cabling, wireless, digital signage, background music, RFID, and surveillance are all core offerings. With a network of over 800 technicians nationwide in the US and Canada, we can handle your installation and service needs in all of these disciplines just about anywhere.
Rock and roll. All right. Well, tell us who's the most appropriate fit for direct to technology, and walk us through who an ideal client would be for you.
And we're really security evangelists. We think every business needs our products. Retail storefronts, back office, and corporate headquarters will all benefit from our services. Even growers, transport, and disposal companies can benefit if you have a centralized computer network, whether it's single or multi-location. Financial companies that are investing in and supporting the cannabis business would also benefit, given the serious financial data involved. We're a very good fit for multi-site businesses and vertically integrated producers, both producing and retailing. Also for companies that have other retail that would like a single source solution, including their cannabis business, vape shops, C-stores, liquor stores, restaurants, etc.
Excellent. Love it. Now, our audience knows we always like to insert a fun one. What are some of the favorite projects you've worked on?
Yeah, I'm a field guy by trade. My favorite projects to work on are new builds. It's just really exciting to see a location come together from the rough space. We recently completed an AV project at a flagship location for a cannabis retailer in Boston, including their digital signage and background music. It was large format LED. We'll be providing additional information on that project after they open it to the public. Before COVID, we did an end-to-end deployment for the Adore Me brands in 4 locations throughout the Northeast. We deployed all their technology throughout the stores, including network security, surveillance, shopper tracking, RFID, digital signage, audio, and back office systems. We have a video walkthrough link on our website, directtext.com.
Excellent. Now, when is the right time to connect with you guys? Walk us through that process.
We don't currently have a managed network provider. The time is right now. If you're making plans for new store deployments, upgrading your network, or moving locations, we can help you with planning and deployment of all on-site infrastructure and technology. The best way to contact us is via email, info@directtext.com. If our products aren't the right fit for you, technically or financially, you'll still benefit from our experience and expertise. There's no charge to talk to us.
Love it. What I love about you guys is the fact that you're affording the cannabis markets the same degree of service that other traditional retailers have always had access to. Now, how did this all come together? And could you share a little bit of your work outside of cannabis?
Yeah, we currently service about 7,500 locations nationwide. A lot of retail C-stores and traditional retailers. Some of the locations we work with are traditional brands you'll be familiar with, 7-Eleven, Valero, and internationally Benetton brands.
Yeah, that sounds like the heaviest of hitters. I'm a big 7-Eleven guy myself, addicted to the Slurpees. Are there any industry associations in or outside of cannabis that you guys are a part of?
Yeah, we're part of the PCI compliance boards and are currently have a certificate of attestation, an attestation of certification for the for PCI compliance.
Excellent. You guys are taking it seriously. To close out, what is the best way to get in touch with you? And please recap some of those offers you're running for Arcview's network.
Yeah, contact info is on our website at directtext.com. You can email us at info@directtext.com or call 833-928-3247. That's 833-92-TEXT. We're offering a special right now for Arcview network members. We're including the firewall and switch hardware at no cost to the end user. That is over $1,000 value. Also, you'll get a lifetime warranty on all network gear as long as you are under our managed services.
That's huge. Always love the generosity there, Joe. And of course, it is just a huge amount of praise for you guys joining us today as our sponsor. And we'll be looking forward to staying in touch and seeing you again. All right.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely, Joe. And everybody, that's info@directtext.com. Now, it is my absolute pleasure to pass the mic over to our very own David Abernathy to get us rolling today. So without further ado, David, take it away.
Thanks, Jake. And thanks everyone for joining us today. This is a topic that is certainly really close to my heart, something that we've been working on for quite a long time. I've been working on for more than a decade in the cannabis space, is federal legalization. And we're extremely fortunate to have some of the best minds I can imagine to discuss what that might look like and how that might affect businesses with us today. So we've got Michael Correa, Wanda James, and Chris Crane with us. Michael Correa is with NCIA. Wanda's from Simply Pure, and Chris is from Forefront. These folks are all extremely knowledgeable in the cannabis space, extremely plugged into what's happening both at the state and federal level. And I'd love for each of you to give a quick introduction to who you are.
Well, David, thank you. I guess I'll just go first since you mentioned me first. Michael Correa, Director of Government Relations for the National Cannabis Industry Association. We are a trade association that are starting our 11th year. I've been here 8 years. We focus on federal lobbying at the federal level, Congress, House, Senate. That's our main focus. And basically, my job over the years has been increasing the visibility of the industry, lobbying in support of the cannabis industry, being a voice for the cannabis industry, and working with coalition partners, advocates, other industry groups to get a good outcome for the cannabis industry. Looking forward to having a lively debate today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Wanda?
Hello, everybody. Snowing out here in Colorado, so we're staying warm. My husband and I have the great distinction of being the first African Americans legally licensed to be able to sell cannabis, not the first African Americans that sold cannabis, but legally licensed. We've been at this now for a little bit over a decade. And, I'm thrilled to see this conversation surrounding federal legalization, because it's something that, we've been looking for a long time. And having companies get ready for what this is going to look like and feel like is really of the utmost importance for this industry to continue to survive and to be able to do it right. Of course, given where we have come from in being a minority dispensary cultivation and edible brand, we can see how federal legalization is going to weave its way into how many new owners we're able to bring into this industry and how that's going to work. So this is a great conversation with an amazing group of people, and I'm really thrilled to be here today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Wanda. Chris?
Hi, yes. So I'm Chris Crane. I'm the founder and co-founder and president of Forefront Ventures. We're a multi-state operator currently active in 6 states across the country. But I've spent the bulk of my career working on cannabis policy issues. Was one of the founding members of Students for Sensible Drug Policy way back in 1998, back before it was cool to work on drug policy and cannabis. I was the associate director at Normal in DC for 6 years, the executive director at Students for Sensible Drug Policy for 4 years, also out of DC before joining what was then very much burgeoning industry back in 2009. I'm currently the vice chair of the board of NCIA, as well as I'm on the board of a few state-based trade associations, including here in my new home state of Illinois.
Awesome, thanks. So this first question is a challenging one. Obviously, there's a huge amount of uncertainty with respect to exactly when federal legalization will happen. But what is each of your guess as to when we might see federal legalization? And the second part is how soon, like in a world in which it moves as quickly as possible, what's the soonest that we would see some sort of federal legalization?
Well, I'll jump in, David, and I just want to say my first event at NCIA was in 2013, and Earl Blumenauer spoke, and he said he had hoped for legalization by 2020. Looking into the future, 7 years seems so far away. Like, of course we can get it. And I had been thinking in my head this would be an 8 to 10 year process for legalization. I'm in year 8 now. And going back about a year or two, I thought by the summer of 2021, we could have legalization. It'd be realistic. Now in January of 2021, I'm very optimistic good will happen. Democrats look at this as they have 2 years to get something done. If not now, when? The Democrats have the House, they have the Senate, they have the White House. Not to get too inside the beltway, but it takes 60 senators to really get something done, and they don't have 60. But I do think now is a right time to get something done. But with that being said, there is a pandemic going on. Congress's priorities are on getting vaccines out to people, getting Biden's nominations into the cabinet, worrying about getting this economy going. But you just saw Chuck Schumer did an interview. It is a priority. It's not going to be on the back burner. And I could see something happening within the next 18 months. I would say sooner rather than later, but it just depends on how this pandemic plays out and where their priorities go. But it's not a guarantee, but I'm very optimistic that we can get something out of this Congress.
So I have been betting on this now since 2010. And you can probably go back and pull interviews where I'm like, next year we're legalizing, next year we're legalizing. We are definitely legalizing next year. I've been wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong. I've been wrong about politics, about who's getting elected president. So I'll be honest with you. I think at this point, everybody is looking to see when this is going to happen. And I don't know that we have any really good feelings for it. However, I will say this. I had the great pleasure of being on Kamala Harris's National Finance Committee and got to know her a little bit. So I know that this is something that she is pushing very hard for. I know that Barbara Lee is working very hard to make this happen. I know that Black businesses across the United States, not in cannabis, but we've lost 40% of Black businesses because of COVID. So I know that when communities of color are talking about COVID recovery, and getting what's going to help bring these communities back, cannabis is a big conversation about it, not just from the standpoint of grow facilities or dispensaries, but from product manufacturing. And so this has been a big push to make happen, as well as federal legalization around who's getting arrested for cannabis. So for people in my community, it's a push to really make happen, because cannabis prohibition has done nothing good for the Black and brown communities. So we're fighting hard for it. So if I had to guess, I would definitely bet big money on less than 2 years. I would bet a little chunk of money on in the next, 12 to 14 months. Well, I mean, we're really, really hopeful. And I think that there's real reason now to make this legal sooner rather than later. And the fact that Colorado hit $2 billion in sales as of November of 2020 for the first time in 1 year. I don't know what those California numbers are going to look like. So banking, we have to address banking. And to the best of my knowledge, the only way that we're going to be able to address banking in meaningful ways is going to be ending the Schedule 1. So all of these things combined, I think that there is huge pressure in making this happen sooner rather than later.
Thanks. Chris,
go ahead, David. I think these two handled it as well. So I don't have a whole lot to add here. I mean, I guess the only thing I would say is having been involved in this from a policy perspective for 25 years or so, this is absolutely the best opportunity that we've had ever. Right, certainly in my career and arguably ever, the last time that we had any chance at some kind of meaningful reform was the first couple of years of the Obama administration. But the Democratic Party was not there at that point, right? Democratic Party leadership, they paid us some lip service, but the president at the time was not in favor of descheduling. I guess you could say the same thing about the president today, but Biden today is actually in a better place than Obama was in 2009, which is kind of crazy given Biden's history on this, having generally been an opponent. But the Democratic Party leadership, by and large, has moved incredibly far in the past, really just 4 years or so, not only being in favor of legalization, but really understanding the nuances and the details. I would say in particular, members of the Congressional Black Caucus understand this issue probably better than anybody in the Democratic Party and really get the nuances of it and how to do it the right way. So look, I will never bet on the Democrats showing courage and doing the right thing in the face of tough opposition. They tend to wilt when it comes to pressure, but we've got 2 years, right? We have to assume that the Democrats will lose one house of Congress in 2022. That typically happens. Well, just statistically or historically, the party that holds the presidency loses seats in a midterm, and the Democrats have the thinnest of margins in both houses. So we have to assume they're going to lose one house in 2 years. And so this is our window. We've got 2 years to get it done. And I like to say that we went from, when those two seats flipped in Georgia a few weeks ago, we went from banking reform being our best case scenario to basically being our worst case scenario, right? If we come out of this, and if we come out of these next 2 years with just banking reform, I'm going to be pretty disappointed. And what we need is everybody rowing in the same direction. All of the industry groups, the companies, the advocacy organizations, right? Everybody needs to be united because this is our window, and we don't know when we're going to have this kind of opportunity again.
And before we go on to the next topic, I wanted to jump on what everyone said, and I totally agree. For years, I've been saying Congress tends to be behind public opinion by 3 to 5 years. I'm going to have to push that back to maybe 6 to 10 years because America has been supportive of this issue for so many years. The public, the support, on medical is 80 plus. Adult use tends to be in the high 50s to low 60s, depending on how it's worded. And, Wanda and Chris mentioned 2009 and Obama. The difference is there were no legal states then, and now there are a lot more legal states, and that changes. There is economic sense, there's common sense. And, as a person that spent 15 years working in Congress, they don't deal with reality. It's a different world over there, and it makes a lot of economic sense and common sense. But does it make political sense for some of these people? Like, why hasn't it happened? And that's one of the things. The House has shown they can pass cannabis reform. They've done that with overwhelming support for SAFE a year and a half ago, with a slight majority with more, so they can pass it. And I guarantee you, any reform bill that gets on Biden's desk, he's not going to veto it. So it's a matter of getting those 60 senators on something, and that's the political dynamic that's going to be really, really important to manage. And Chris, whatever Chris said, we all need to row together. We all need to work together. We all need to go in the same direction. And I've said this for years. Can we legalize cannabis first and then fight later? We're doing a lot of fighting right now, arguing over stuff, and we haven't even got to legalization. I tend to be the realist in the room, and whatever's moving, I get behind. I'm supportive. Anything, I love sports analogies, anything that moves the chains along, anything that helps reform get further to the end goal, I'm supportive of. And it's my, there's a little delayed gratification with the election until Georgia happened. And definitely I became a lot more optimistic over the next 18 months once the majority was going to be in the Democratic hands, all those slides. So just wanted to throw that in there before we go off on another topic.
Excellent points. So since the advent of legal cannabis in the states, changes in laws and changes in regulations have been the dominant driver of industry growth. And they've also represented some of the biggest risks and challenges that companies have faced. Different laws in different states allow companies to do things differently, sometimes mandate companies to do things differently. So an activity that might be mandated in one state might be prohibited in another, for example. There have also been some major regulatory changes within states that have shifted the landscape in such a way that companies just didn't survive the transition. California is a really good example of this when the new regulations took effect in 2018. A huge number of businesses that had been operating under the previous medical rules were either unwilling or unable to continue to operate under the new rules. It's hard to overstate the impact that federal legalization, whatever it looks like, will have on the industry. Would you agree that for many businesses, whether they're plant touching or ancillary businesses, federal legalization is likely to represent some of the biggest opportunities and some of the biggest risks that they've ever faced in the space?
I can start there. Yes, I think it presents a tremendous opportunity, but there will be risks to some of the businesses in particular because there's going to be a whole new set of federal regulations. And that's really going to be the next big fight that I think we're all going to have to keep our eye on here, because realistically, we could get federal legalization, but depending on how they regulate this, I mean, if you look at what's going on in hemp, for example, a lot of the smaller hemp producers, right, have been basically put out of business. I would actually even look at, and I know this because this was an industry my brother was heavily involved in for a time, the vaping industry. A few years back, if you went to a Champs trade show or a vaping industry trade show, there were thousands of small producers. And when the FDA came in and regulated that, they basically gave the entire industry to big tobacco. They made it prohibitively expensive for any small businesses to comply with regulations around approving SKUs for vape juice and these kind of things. And so how the federal government ultimately oversees legalization, and this is probably something that's not going to be in legislation, this will likely be in the rulemaking process that follows, is going to have a tremendous impact on whether or not the business models that currently exist will be able to survive in a federally regulated marketplace. That said, I think there are tremendous opportunities for businesses that are looking to grow or looking to expand, but it will depend a little bit on what business you're in, right? If you're in the business of doing indoor cultivation in Massachusetts, it might be challenging when the walls of interstate commerce come down and you've got cheap cultivated product coming in from the West Coast or even potentially internationally. If you are in the business of producing finished consumer packaged goods, right, edibles, that might be a great opportunity for you, because now you're going to have access to really cheap biomass coming in from places out west and even places like Mexico or Colombia, places where we get cut flowers and other types of cheap agriculture. So it depends largely, I think, on what section of the industry you're in. Some will get more challenging, and some there's going to be really big opportunities for growth.
I think that the biggest opportunity that's going to come from legalization, is actually banking. Simply Pure, we have a legal bank account here in Colorado, but it's not a bank account, it's a depository, which means we can drop off our money and we can write checks on it. That's it. No credit cards, no line of credit, no loans, no nothing that a normal bank would be able to, supply for you. And I think that a lot of people have great business ideas. Even getting a dispensary license, in a normal world, you'd be able to go to a bank and say, I've got this opportunity to be one of 35 dispensaries in a state. We know we're going to make X amount of money, and, a line of credit, a loan, or even being able to go to the SBA for training and for, low interest loans. I mean, I laugh with my husband, Scott, that our very first business back when we were 30 years old was an SBA funded restaurant in Santa Monica, California. That was our very first entree my very first entree into a brick and mortar entrepreneurial opportunity, right? And so, if you are in the business of giving, ridiculously high interest, predatory loans in the cannabis space, yeah, your days are kind of numbered, once legalization comes in. But I really look forward to it. There's going to be definitive challenges that are going to happen. People who have set up their companies in different ways in different states may find it challenging of how you're going to roll all that up into, one big company when you're allowed to or not. So I think that those are the challenges that we're all going to have to sit down and figure out with our business advisors and how that's going to be able to move forward. But, for me personally, I see nothing but upside when legalization happens. And it was thrilling to be in Canada a number of years back when legalization happened with them. And I couldn't get over the fact that their medical marijuana patients just get their stuff mailed to them, shows up in the mail, and I'm like, that's brilliant. So it will be a lot of different things that can happen, and a lot of different business enterprises, will take root once we're not dealing with the federal illegalization of it. But the other thing too is people get excited, but remember, it took alcohol a long time to be legal state by state, county by county, city by city. There may even still be some dry counties in the United States, I'm assuming. So, there'll definitely be challenges, but that's why this conversation and getting people ready for what's possible is going to be a big deal. And now's the time to start to think about that.
And so I defer to Wanda and Chris when it comes to the business aspects, but I just wanted to put out there, and one, totally agree with Wanda, access to capital is so important because no one should have to have a trade-off of getting access to capital or giving away half of their business or a quarter of their business to a venture capitalist to expand. And so that's important. But I just wanted to bring up, this is a policy paper NCI had done in October of 2019, adapting a regulatory framework for the emerging cannabis industry. We held a briefing, and it's available on our website. Anyone can go to our website and see it. We held a briefing on Capitol Hill in November, and my goal was to turn this concept, these ideas into legislation that could be used, on the, added to the MORE Act or used as a framework for something. Because if Congress just leaves it alone, this will be litigated for the next 10 to 20 years, and you will never have any certainty. And you need to direct the administration on how it should be regulated. And we know, we've seen in California, Washington, other states, if you do regulations wrong, it throws back the movement. So there's that very fine line of doing it right. And so our view is NCI, our policy council, wants to be like a think tank, an idea generator of, instead of federal policymakers reinventing the wheel or not learning from the mistakes of some of these states. We have now had states out there who've been going on 6, 7, 8 years with sales. We can learn what works from some of these states, what doesn't work, and what would be an appropriate taxation level, so we can bring the illicit market into the tax and regulated market. And regulations are very important. I know there are a lot of people out there that are saying, screw it, decriminalize this, make it like tomatoes and let me grow it in my backyard. That's not going to happen in America. We need some forms of regulation. Now, whether it's a light touch, it's heavily, we can debate that, but we need to do something right in Congress so they get it right. So 10 years after this happens, we're not figuring out why did we blow this? How did we blow it? I would like to learn the lessons and the mistakes of some of these states that have done it right and wrong.
Absolutely. Chris, you mentioned something about a grower in Massachusetts potentially having some soul searching to do when folks can start bringing in cannabis from the West Coast or potentially other countries. For all of you, what do you think the likelihood is that when we get some form of federal legalization, it will sort of blow the doors off this artificially siloed system that we have, where each state has a fully siloed supply chain built within the state? Obviously, one outcome could be that any state can all of a sudden send cannabis to any other state, and other countries can send cannabis to the United States. But another outcome could be just sort of exempting cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act to the extent that it's been legalized within a state, and keeping those barriers up. What do you think is the likelihood that we'll see these scenarios or some other scenario with respect to moving cannabis around?
So I don't think we know yet, frankly. And I will say that whatever winds up happening, I think we should, we all need to take a little bit of a step back and recognize that it's going to take time.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I go back to what happened with the hemp legalization and the Farm Bill a few years ago. Right. It's been a couple of years since that passed. The FDA is still working through a regulatory system for hemp and for CBD, for hemp derived CBD. It's going to be probably a 2 to 5 year process of federal rulemaking before we have a unified set of federal rules. And I think that the question that you asked will likely be determined in that rulemaking process much more than it will be in the actual legislation and through Congress. These are really detailed issues that generally are dealt with through rulemaking in departments rather than in legislation itself. So there are different ways that this could wind up going. You could have a system where the feds say, look, this is free commerce, free and open commerce across the United States. There's no longer going to be state borders when it comes to cannabis commerce. I don't think that's likely going to be the way that they start. Right? We still give states a lot of deference when it comes to their alcohol regulations. Right? Some states you can buy alcohol at any 7-Eleven or bodega or supermarket. Some states you have to go to a government-owned and government-run package store. And so and there are places, as Wanda mentioned, with dry counties, and I think the states are going to be probably to be given a lot of leeway to make some of their own decisions about what they do and don't allow in their states. I think the question is whether that's going to apply to interstate commerce, and if so, how. I could foresee a system, and I'm not necessarily predicting this is how it will play out, but I could foresee a system where states get to make the decision about what they allow in terms of interstate commerce. And under that scenario, you could see states like California, Oregon, Washington, which are natural producer states, pushing really hard to form essentially trade agreements with other states that they could export into. I could see a state like, let's say, Utah, for example, which has legalized medical cannabis, but they're ultra conservative, basically run by the the LDS Church. I could see them saying, we don't really want to be in the business of regulating the growing of a sinful product. We're just going to buy it all from Oregon next door. Right, and they could basically be an import state without allowing it to be cultivated within Utah. And I could see a state, for example, like Illinois, where you have a relatively small number of producers, but who are very well politically connected in the state, getting a system where they don't allow any imports into Illinois in order to protect the existing market and the producers in that state that would likely be overrun by a flood of cheap product coming in from the West Coast. So you may see a patchwork. I don't think that that's sustainable in the long term. Eventually, I think those walls have to come down because it's not how we do most things in this country. But I could see that being the scenario for the next, or I should say, actually the first, say, 3 to 7 years of some sort of federal legalization until those walls do come crashing down.
I think the most interesting thing that's going to happen with federal legalization, and I agree with Chris, it's definitely going to take some time. And everybody is going to initially want to protect, their investment that they've put into each of these states, because let's be real, a decade into this, or a little longer than a decade into this, there's been some really big money invested, in each state to be able to make a business enterprise profitable in that state. However, where I do think that I'm hoping to see some big changes is in the sharing of different strains easily. It's kind of crazy that you can find a strain in California that you really love, and you can't even bring the seed here to Colorado to be able to breed it or to be able to change it. Oddly, seeds end up here. I don't know how that happens, but so things like that, to be able to remove the ridiculous barriers, for folks that, and once again, the business that you're in, if you happen to be a breeder in California and you're breeding, an amazing, a plant, it would be nice to be able to have that plant in more than just one state. And especially now that we have so many companies that are franchised or are in different states, it seems kind of crazy that you can go to a Simply Pure in Colorado and maybe a Simply Pure, knock on wood, in Illinois would not have the same strains because we're not able to move them state to state. So perhaps there would be, some kind of allowance to be able to do that, or even edible products. It seems ridiculous to have a manufacturing facility to create the same gummy in every state instead of just, sending the state the gummy. So there's a lot of stuff that just is ridiculous, state by state right now under federal guidelines. And I would hope that we would able to convene. And like you said, Chris, it's going to be in the rulemaking, not so much in the legalization, but in the rulemaking that allows just business to happen, even if we can't bring in, massive amounts of cannabis from state to state. Perhaps we can figure out a way just to be able to make business easier, that we can maybe bring seeds or, I forgot what the plant slices. Forgive me, I'm forgetting what those are called. There you go. To be able to have the opportunity to have consistent business state to state to state to state. And I think that that's what most folks that are involved in cannabis right now want to be able to have, is not the expense of having to grow our business literally in every state.
And I agree 100% with what Chris and Wanda just said. And NCIA's view for years has been, we want the cannabis industry to be treated like every other business in America. Every other business can do these things. They don't have to worry about this sort of state model. And because of this federal state conflict, this patchwork, this is what we have. And I can only imagine trying to make investments in the cannabis industry tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, knowing that your time frame may be 3 to 5 years, and knowing in 1 year, 18 months, or 2 years, that's going to completely change. And that's got to be very hard, because eventually, I assume we're going to have some equalization where, like why you have oranges growing in Florida. You're going to have equalization among states, to where certain states are going to grow, certain states are going to consume, they cultivate, they process, they produce in other areas, and you have this free flow. But that could be years off, if not decades off, and I don't know. And that's where the sort of political power and political will of people. NCIA, our approach is let's legalize this. Let's treat the cannabis industry equally. I'm not pushing one business. I'm not pushing 10 businesses. I'm not pushing any economic company model. I want the equality among everyone. So then the business owners can fight it out, and whatever happens after that's important. But I know it is going to be a challenge, because this will just, the day after legalization, you're not going to have this. This could be spread out, like Wanda mentioned, over alcohol, that could last years and decades.
Yeah. So certainly on the plant touching side of the business, there's going to be a lot of figuring out to do when it comes to how exactly the regulations are going to look. One of the areas where things might move very significantly faster is on the ancillary side of the business. There are all sorts of businesses now that have carved out niches for themselves, either because their bigger, more well-capitalized mainstream competitors are hesitant to operate in the cannabis space, or because there are so many peculiarities about this sort of federal illegality and state legality system that allows an ancillary business to build up some expertise around issues like 280E, or the fact that a lot of cannabis businesses have trouble getting banking, the lack of normal mainstream financial services for the industry. What would you say to ancillary businesses that really potentially right after federal legalization takes effect could face a flood of changes to not only the sort of landscape in which they operate in, but the competitors that they may be competing against?
So I can start here on this one. I mean, I think it's going to largely depend on what ancillary business they're involved in. Some I think are going to be really well positioned to get bigger or to get acquired, frankly. So if you've created, I would say, look, a company like MJ Freeway or Leaf Logics, right? Companies that have created point of sale systems that have been developed specifically for cannabis retail or for seed to sale tracking. That's not something that a large point of sale system company can just take their existing system and put it into a cannabis business and have it work. We've seen that tried in the early days, didn't work. That's why these cannabis specific POS companies have sprung up and control the industry. You can't just take a yoga studio, point of sale program and put it into a dispensary, have it work, or a bar or liquor store. So I think there are large companies out there that do point of sale as their core business, or they will probably want to get into cannabis, and so they'll probably look to the companies that exist to have market share in terms of acquisition targets, and those companies could be very well positioned. And there's lots of other companies that fit specific niches like that. For companies that have created sort of workaround businesses to solve issues in the cannabis industry that could normally be solved through fairly standard business channels, they may be in more trouble. And I'm thinking specifically about cashless payment systems, right? Where you've got a card that's specific to cannabis, and you move money from your bank into that card, and you can use that in lieu of a credit card at the point of sale system. Right? Those are hard enough to get people to use now, even though credit cards aren't available, just because it's not how they're used to shopping. So once somebody can use a MasterCard or a Visa, right, those systems probably go out the window, and there's no incentive for MasterCard or Visa to acquire them, right, because people are just going to use what they're used to using. So it does largely depend, I think, on what you're doing. But if you've created something that's really unique to the cannabis industry and there's still a need for it post-legalization, you're probably really well set up to be a good acquisition target for one of these bigger companies that stayed out due to its illegality.
And Chris, you brought up a really good point as well, too. And it's really interesting when you start talking about things like point of sale systems. Coming out of the restaurant industry, I got to tell you, a basic restaurant POS does more than most of the POS systems that I have worked with in the cannabis space. And I pay a tremendous amount a month that I would have never have paid for my restaurant POS that, we're paying for in the cannabis space. And I think that a lot of companies, to your point, Chris, are going to get hit for that because having the benefit of being an entrepreneur for 20 years before cannabis in other areas, what we pay in this industry for some really basic services, I mean, is really, quite frankly, ridiculous and through the roof. So auxiliary businesses that aren't product based or something interesting, entrepreneurial wise, are really going to take, I think, a hit on that, especially if they've made money off of the fact that we are dealing with a Schedule I, illegal drug. Interestingly enough, and we didn't talk about this when we had planned, but I'm curious in putting this out to Michael and Chris. Will the state tracking still be something that we worry about? I mean, because right now, once again, owning a restaurant, nobody is tracking vodka, except for the folks that are selling it to see how much money they made off of it, right? So, I mean, will Metric go away? Does BioTrack go away? And I know that those companies have put in a tremendous amount of money in doing so and cost. But that won't be something that is required especially as the international walls go down and the state walls go down, and we finally come to our senses that if a child sees cannabis, they won't be ruined for the rest of their entire life. So I think that this is going to be some companies that are really going to have to think about what the end of their reign is going to look like, because that is absolutely coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I could see some of that stuff sticking around for a little while, just because it's sort of a vestige of how this started, right? A vestige of the early days. But you're right. I mean, eventually, if our mantra has been regulate marijuana like alcohol, we don't track alcohol sales the way that we track marijuana sales, and so I think that will probably go away over time. I think it's a matter of how long rather than if.
Yep. So. At the Arcview Group, we help our clients think through these issues. We help our clients look at what's likely coming, what are the scenarios that are most plausible at any given time, and how that might impact their business. What potential acquirers might be looking for in their specific vertical. We track what's happening at the state and federal level very closely. I sit on boards that give me access to lobbyists and legislators. And I know all of you are extremely sort of plugged into what's happening as well. Other than attending sort of webinars like this, and we'll be doing a lot more of these webinars specifically about what's happening at the federal level throughout the rest of the year, what advice would you give to business owners who might not be as plugged in as we are in terms of following what's happening and trying to figure out how that might impact them?
I get that question a lot from people. How do we get involved? Where do we find information? And I have to be really honest here. There is no one place that you can go and get all the information that you need to open your business. To be able to do this, and I mean, I need folks that they hear nothing else that we talk about, whether you're planning long-term, short-term, or whether you're in it, the only way to get to know this industry and the only way to get to be a part of this industry is you've got to go ahead and invest some time, and you've got to dig. You've got to talk to attorneys. You've got to talk to dispensary owners that are already in it. You've got to talk to growers that are already doing it. Then you've got to go to the to the NCIAs, to the MPPs, to the women grows, to the your normal your local normal chapters. There is just not one piece of advice or one place that you can get this information. There's just not. Even as a dispensary owner licensed in all aspects for well over a decade, I still need the help of, the Marijuana Industry Group here in Colorado, because they give us a lot of different information that, quite frankly, I can't be in all of the rulemaking meetings. I mean, just today, there were 3 rulemaking, things here in Colorado on delivery, on social equity, I mean, and it goes on and on and on and on. And there's just no way that one person can make enough rounds or find enough information that is going to make whatever your thought is or whatever your business is going to be in cannabis. You have got to decide to dig in. This is an MBA, I mean, it is. I mean, it's an MBA with footnotes. It's a PhD. You've got to perform your thesis here. I mean, you've really got to do a lot of information. And then the information I give you is not going to be the same as what Chris gives you, you know what I mean? Or the same that someone that owns a huge, multi-state organization that decided to build it, that way when it started. So you have just got to dig in, and every piece of information you can find, you have got to want to read it and want to be a part of it, because there is not one place that you can do this. It's just not.
Absolutely. You say it's a PhD, and I actually sit on the dissertation committee of a doctoral researcher at Northeastern who's writing her dissertation specifically on how regulations in California affect people's decision whether or not to participate in the regulated industry.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can say much more than what Wanda just said. She's 100% correct. I mean, I think given the opportunity that we have and the likelihood of substantive change at the federal level coming in the next couple of years, you really need to be plugged into the organizations that are doing the work and understand the nuances. So you need to be a member of NCIA. You need to be a member of your state-based trade association. Some states, there are multiple ones, so you need to do your research into which ones, which one has the best access and best intel. But you have to be involved. And and top of that, I would say, think a lot about what this post-prohibition world is likely to look like, and is your business model something that's likely to survive when these changes come? Are you investing a lot of money into building a high-tech indoor cultivation facility in a northeastern state, right? That might not be a viable long-term business. But also, don't panic on these things either, right? And I'll give an example from my own company, right? We are building a very large indoor cultivation and processing facility in Illinois, right? And I just said, well, that's probably not a viable long-term business, right? It's true. But right now in Illinois, the market dynamics are such that we could put, $10, $20 million into building this facility, cultivation processing facility in Illinois, and we will almost certainly make that investment up in the first 6 months of operation. And we've got, I think we've got a few year window before full walls of interstate commerce come down. So we'll likely have made back that investment and then made quite a bit of profit. But we recognize there's likely an end game there to that particular project. But also, we're not just building cultivation, but we're also building a processing facility that can do consumer packaged goods at scale, at a very low price point. That part of that facility would likely survive after interstate commerce. Right? We have a farm in Washington. We could just start, we can shut down the cultivation portion of that project and just start shipping biomass in from Washington to Illinois. So think about the short, medium, and long term, and be ready for, if you have a great opportunity and you can make back your investment and then some in the next 2 years, okay, probably worth it. But how do you set that up so that you're able to pivot when interstate commerce comes into play, and not just sort of delude yourself into thinking that because something's going to be a really good business for the next year or two, that it's always going to be a good business? Because if there's one constant in the cannabis industry, it's change. And we need to be prepared for the change that's coming down the road.
So I don't pretend to be an entrepreneur, and I do not give business advice. I leave that to Wanda and Chris because I respect them, but I love giving advice because that's what I do. I remember a reporter asked the dean of Harvard Law School what advice you'd give to college graduates, and he said, don't go to law school. And my advice to people who want to get involved with the cannabis industry, don't, unless you are willing to do it for the right reasons. And like Wanda said, you are willing to do all the research ahead of time to know how very tough it is. I have my little easy button right here, and a lot of people think that making money in the cannabis industry is very easy, and Wanda will agree that it is not. You have to get in for the right reasons. And I'll get up on my soapbox and just say a couple last things that I'll probably catch a lot of grief for. But from what I've seen, I think there are a lot of business people who are getting involved in the cannabis industry that do not know the nuances of the cannabis industry and the history. And I believe there are a lot of old school cannabis people that don't know shit about business. And then now this is really going to get me in trouble. I think there are a lot of both of them that don't know shit about politics, because I've been in politics. Politics is my jam. I've been in politics 25 years. And a lot of people think they snap their fingers and they know how it works, and they don't understand. And we need an education campaign. We need a grassroots. We need lobbying. We need a lot of work. We need to work together. And so my advice to everyone is do the research. It's a lot cheaper to join NCIA, go to these trade shows, and learn before you start lawyering up and start, pissing away hundreds of thousands of dollars before you realize that you weren't printing the money that you thought you were going to be making because you saw Marijuana Millionaires or you saw something on TV. A lot of work goes into it, and I don't even claim to be an entrepreneur. I see Wanda smiling, so I want to hear her last thoughts. But that's just my advice: get in for the right reasons and do it for the right reasons.
Get in for the right reasons and definitely understand it. People come to me all the time asking if I would, mentor, help, or whatever else. And I ask them, how they're going to go about 280E in their business, and they blank over. And as soon as they do that, I send them to very basic courses, because if you don't understand, if you're even thinking about this and you don't know what 280E is, that's like me wanting to be a basketball player and not knowing what a basketball court looks like. So, I mean, those are just some real basic things. And even to Michael's point as well, too, is, you may have the very next best thing in cannabis. You absolutely might. But let me give a word of advice to everybody. One, you will not control the industry. You will not be the biggest, the best, the most expensive, the most everything. That's not going to happen. All right. So lose that idea. It doesn't mean that small ideas don't work. I mean, I bet a bunch of you don't know that Colorado every year produces one crop of peaches, Palisade peaches. They are said to be some of the best in the world. The people who grow peaches, I'm sure, do very well with that one crop in that one niche existence right there. But if someone came to me and says, I'm interested in starting, a peach farm in Colorado, what do you think about that? I'm going to say, well, you might want to think that all the way through, because what is the market for, Colorado grown peaches? So there is so much that, you need to learn in all of this. And this is not easy. This is extremely difficult. I have been a military officer. I have been a corporate executive. I have been an entrepreneur, and I've also been in politics for well over, 20, 25 years. This has been the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life. And I am damn good at business and getting through it and finding ways around it. This is 10 times harder than being a military officer. This is harder than being in corporate America. This is harder than running your family business. And it's unforgiving. The fines are ridiculous when you make a mistake. Bad investor marriages there are volumes written about that in this industry. People losing their business because they spent most of their time fighting with investors and partners. Not understanding how to produce a quality product. You're shot down before you start. So really take that time and understand what you're getting into. This is not a glamorous business. Folks see me on videos and interviews and doing, these webinars, and they think that this is how the typical cannabis entrepreneur spends its day, and then we all go get high for the rest of the day, right? It's none of that. From the time I wake up in the morning to the time I go to bed at night, this is like raising a delinquent child. There's always an issue going on, and I'm always stressed out about it. So, think this through. It's a great thing. I love it. There would be nothing else in this world that I would rather be doing, but, this is a whole different level of stuff, and you got to know it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could add anything much more to that. This is really hard. A lot of people when they first get into it think that this is marijuana. You're just going to be, it's literally money growing on trees. It's not. We have more roadblocks in our way than in just about any other industry. You got to love what you're doing. You got to love the industry. There are opportunities, and I think if you're coming into this as a get rich quick scheme, you think that you're going to make a ton of money in a short amount of time. Like, this is not the business for you. But if you're in this for the long haul, there are some tremendous opportunities. And I think, those of us that stick it out and do things the right way are going to be richly rewarded for it, or at least many of us will. But it's hard. I like to joke. I've got a business partner of mine. I've been in this 25 years. He's been in it for about 6. So he's a veteran now of the industry, came from the finance world and kind of at the point now where we always say, when we're looking for a local partner in a new state or, somebody to team up with or do some work with, like if they haven't been kicked in the teeth a couple of times in this industry already, like I don't want to work with them. Right. Those people who like come into this from other businesses and have been successful, like, oh yeah, I ran this company and I know what I'm doing and this is going to be easy. Like I want no part of that, right? Because they're going to get kicked in the teeth a couple of times, they're going to get knocked down. And, and I tell them like, and I won't name any names, but I remember having a conversation with someone, a few years ago where with this partner of mine, we both walked away going like, no, they are way too optimistic. Like we're going to walk away from this one. And they came back to us a couple of years later and they're like, yeah, that was really hard. And then we worked with them, right? Because they had actually been beaten down a couple of times. So, don't get discouraged. It's hard, but it's a lot of fun. And if you can keep your mind on that end goal and you can understand what's coming down the pike and be ready to roll with the punches and make those changes, like there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Yep. So we're about to jump into the Q&A. I couldn't agree more. It's an incredibly complex, ever-changing, very challenging industry to operate in. One of the things that I find myself occasionally doing when talking to prospective clients is disabusing them of the notion that they're just going to enter cannabis and everything is going to go smoothly and all of the projections that they've made are going to become a reality and then they'll be rich. But the last thing, and I'd like to keep this relatively short, are I guess the last 2 questions. First, we saw when Canada legalized cannabis at a federal level, what I think can only be referred to as a little bit of irrational exuberance around, especially the public markets, but even the private markets got a little out of hand as well. What do you think is likely to happen around U.S. federal legalization with respect to things like valuations? And also, are there any other sort of final thoughts that you'd like to share with folks?
So on the valuation side, whenever a federal legalization bill passes, I think these stock the publicly traded cannabis stocks are going to go bonkers. And this is my gut feeling, right? It's not obviously nobody knows for sure. I mean, just look at what happened 3 weeks ago now, the morning after the Georgia Senate elections. Like basically every cannabis stock was up 15 to 20%. That wasn't because they were doing 15 to 20% better business overnight. Right. This wasn't based on business fundamentals. This was speculation that federal law is about to change, and that's going to open up massive new opportunities. And so there was a buying spree, buying frenzy, and we've seen that in virtually every election where cannabis is legalized in more states. We see the stocks jump based on those election results. So I think for publicly traded companies in particular, you'll likely see a boom when there is a federal law change, even if it's banking. And I will say, if it is just safe banking, that valuation boom or that stock increase you'll likely see will probably be justified, right? Unlike most of the other booms we've seen in the past, because opening access to institutional capital, opening access to potentially to U.S. exchanges where companies could be listed on the NYSE or the NASDAQ as opposed to the Canadian Securities Exchange, right? Like that puts massive amounts of capital into the industry that's currently still sitting on the sidelines. That allows these businesses to grow much more rapidly than they would have been able to otherwise. So, I mean, that would be something that I think the exuberance and the valuation boost would probably be justified there because it will have just a really profound impact on the ability of particularly these public companies to grow their businesses in a much more in a much faster way than we would have seen otherwise.
Well, and once we end this 280E debacle that we're operating under, I mean, that puts 40 to 80%, revenue on the bottom line of what your company is all about, and for everybody on the panel of the 500 folks that are here, I'm sure you all know that most of the money that we pay, my biggest partner in Simply Pure is the federal government. So once we no longer have to do that, yeah, the businesses will be worth tremendously a lot more. And I think on a final piece that I would like to put on, and this is my personal pet peeve, I'm gonna get myself in trouble too, Michael, but I don't really understand people that get in this business and don't like cannabis. That's the craziest thing in the world to me, and if you're in it because you just think it's going to be money, trust me, you're not even going to have the ability to talk to people about it. It's like, if I found out that Ernest and Julio Gallo didn't like wine, I would never buy a bottle of wine from them again. I mean, it seems crazy to me that so many people are involved, or not so many, but a good number of people are involved that don't like the plant, that don't, enjoy anything about it on any level, and I know some folks that love to grow. At least I can see that they love the plant itself and love the agricultural feel to it. I get that. But there should be something about this industry that you love to do to be a part of it. For instance, I don't really care about basketball. So why would I attempt to work in the basketball industry and work my way up to own a basketball team when I don't like it, don't want to watch it, don't care who the players are, don't know who Michael Jordan is? I mean, it would just seem ridiculous to be a part of that industry that you don't enjoy. So my pet peeve personally, if you don't like cannabis, I'm really not the person to come talk to about helping you grow your business or how you get in or investing. So my personal pet peeve.
Awesome. Louis, I assume that we probably have some questions from the audience. If you want to jump in here, and hopefully we can get a few of those answered.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, David, and to all of our panelists, Chris, Wanda, Mike. I mean, just absolutely blown away by what we heard. I don't think we pulled any punches. And I've gotten multiple comments about how people have really appreciated the candor and the actionable advice that we heard here. Couldn't agree more with a particular point made earlier about this not being an easy industry to get into, and that people who come from the traditional industries mistakenly thinking that they have all the answers, and legacy cannabis operators not understanding business fundamentals, that just couldn't be more true. And some people have heard me say this, but as I like to say, it takes both the suit and ties and the tie-dyes to make this industry work. But let's get to the Q&A. We've got a number of questions that have come in. If I didn't get to yours, I apologize. There are hundreds of you and a lot of questions that came in, but I'll try to aggregate and paraphrase as much as we can. But Wanda, this first question is for you. As the sole operator on this panel, I have to hear your perspective on this. What are some of the biggest problems you have that you hope federal legalization would solve for you? Is it funding, insurance, efficiency? You talked about 280E. Like, what is, if you could wave that magic wand, right? Like, what would you like federal legalization to solve for you?
So the biggest issue that I run into is being Black and being in this industry is funding. We have been at this longer than most folks, and even today, it is difficult to get funding for growth, for doing the things that we want to do. If I want to change the lights in my grow facility and need $200,000, I end up in front of somebody that wants 20% of my company to loan us, $200, which becomes an obscene grab for cash, instead of just going to a bank and saying, look, we've got 10 years of books, great books, we have great profit, we're making money, we got cash flow, and can we get a line of credit to be able to grow this? So for me, and once again, being a Black woman and anybody that is minority, and I keep coming back down to this, for Black and brown people in general to get loans or startup capital for even non-cannabis businesses, for just the regular world, is a ridiculous path that you have to go through. When you add cannabis to it, and the unbearable whiteness of cannabis and the unbearable whiteness of cannabis investors, man, I can't wait for legalization for that one thing, just to be able to put what I consider a great run company, great products, and now to be able to have the financing that we would need would just would tremendously turn our business around.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we're looking forward to over here at Arcview. A lot of capital is sitting on the sidelines. This industry was initially funded by angel investors and private equity and smaller VCs. When you hear about $100 million fund in cannabis, wow, those are big numbers, but that's small potatoes compared to larger funds like in the tech space, for example, right? But a lot of capital is sitting on the sidelines simply because of federal illegalization. Major banks can't get involved. The SBA can't get involved, right, to support small and diverse businesses. Absolutely. That's one of the things that we're looking forward to.
And
here
even
as well.
just real quick, when you start talking about large Black companies to be able to invest in Black-owned businesses or Latino-owned businesses, they're conservative, and we are still in the first generation of Black wealth. So they are still fearful of losing it. So they can see that it's happening, but they're still afraid to jump in because of the illegal nature of it. So, yeah, I really look forward to the change with that.
100%. Now, Mike, this one is for you. I want to hone in on the Safe Banking Act and MORE Act. These are two pieces of legislation that have made headlines and headway, sure, with, of course, some stops and stalls along the way. Are there any specific updates about these two bills and anything else coming down the pipeline that you can share with us?
The only thing about SAFE is it's been around longer. It's teed up. It had more co-sponsors, so it's a little. I tell people that it's the least cannabis bill out there. And so we are hopeful that if Congress is to do a next pandemic stimulus funding bill, that they include safe banking language in there, which has been included twice in the Democratic House version, but the Senate has stripped it out. Now, will a Senate Democratic majority be able to keep it in? Our hope is maybe yes. So maybe we can get some good news off of that. The hope is the Safe Banking Act will be reintroduced maybe in February, maybe March. I'm in no big hurry, but if Capitol Hill's in a hurry, great. I expect it to be very similar to the last. Now, more is a different discussion because there was an amendment added at the last minute that troubled a lot of people, including NCIA, but the historic nature of its passage was more important than arguing over amended language when Congress was going to be ending a week or two later and they would reintroduce it. So I expect a new and improved, more 2.0 version to come up or be introduced. So there's that. And then if you saw, Chuck Schumer just gave an interview where he's saying, and we've heard this from a couple Senate offices, they were asking us, hey, something's going to be coming down. They may take a lot of these ideas and put them into one bill. Whether that's a Chuck Schumer bill or whether that's a legalization bill or a Senate version of MORE, I don't know. But we're waiting on that. And listen, you can introduce all the bills you want. What matters is, can they actually get passed? Can they get on the president's desk? Do they really have legs to move? And that's something that's to be determined once they do it. But as I mentioned before, as long as they're focused on, we do have that coup attempt in the impeachment of former President. I've already forgot his name. Trump. Thank you. Forgot his name. That could take up some time. We have the nomination and appointments of a lot of cabinet positions, and we have pandemic vaccine rollout funding. So that could delay something, but I could see maybe an introduction happening sometime soon. So that's a plan. And once something happens, I'll see how far-reaching and inclusive it is, and then what's the plan going forward? Is there a House strategy, a Senate strategy? What exactly is going on? So that's what I'm expecting right now.
That's good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think the MORE Act, the passage of the MORE Act was really a wake-up call to a lot of the folks. I sit on the board of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, and I know personally in the last 24 to 48 hours before the passage of the MORE Act, when we found out that these provisions had been added in at the last minute, I spent a lot of time on calls with members of Congress because they weren't even aware of these last minute provisions and how problematic they were. So it's going to be really important to keep an eye on these bills, a very close eye. There are folks who are going to try to slip things in at the last minute that could fundamentally change and potentially very much harm the intent of these bills. So it's certainly something that we'll be keeping a much closer eye on. And now that, fortunately, I've got assurances from members of Congress that that they will be looking for these things too and making sure that some of these more problematic provisions don't get included in future versions.
And just on to your point, David, the issue was a lot of these discussions are happening right around Thanksgiving. And we got the amended language on Monday after Thanksgiving, and the bill was being voted on at the end of the week. So a discussion that should have taken place over the course of 2 or 3 months was taking place over 2 to 3 days. And the fear, you saw passed by just a couple votes. The fear was it was so late in the process, if we voiced our concerns, it could bring down the vote. And the fact that it was the end of Congress in a different situation, you would have seen a lot more noise, and there would have been a vocal opposition to these provisions. But because of that, that was the calculation a lot of people did at the very end, because our champions were Barbara Lee and Earl Blumenauer, people who are fighting the good fight, and they saw the realistic aspect that, hey, listen, let's work on this, let's improve it. And if you watch the debate, you saw Barbara Lee come to the House floor, read a statement that said, we are willing to make improvements and working with the industry and advocates to achieve that. So I was comfortable with the way. I was not happy with the way things went down at the end, but I was comfortable with the process and how we knew they would work on it into the future.
Great. Thank you so much. Chris, last one is for you before I turn it over back to David and Jennifer Lee to continue the conversation here. But this is more of a state-specific question, but it's related to federal legalization. We've essentially seen two different licensing models shake out, right? Limited versus open. Do you have opinions on either one of these models, and if either one of these models has more of a chance of surviving in a federal legalized landscape?
Great question. So at my core, I'm much more in favor of unlimited license states. I think, the markets can generally figure these things out. And we've seen, and look, I say this as somebody who started a company that we made our name in winning competitive licenses for clients early on in our history. So we've been very good at navigating these competitive application processes, but we've certainly seen that competitive application processes, which typically come with limited license states, are wrought with problems, right? Corruption issues. There's almost always lawsuits over who wins and who loses. And frankly, in the early days, those competitive application processes were actually pretty good at deciphering who were the better applicants from everybody else, because there weren't very many good applicants back then. But now, every company, particularly larger companies, right? They all have teams of application writers and lawyers and outside counsel, and they're all really good at it. And so, number one, they tend to give a big advantage to the bigger companies over the mom and pop entrepreneurs who don't have those kind of resources to put together these 2,000-page, super impressive looking applications. But also, you always at this point have more qualified operators than you have licenses. And so these competitive application processes tend to become somewhat arbitrary in terms of who winds up getting in the top third, or the number that's required to win, is largely based on who's reviewing it and how are they reviewing it and what sections are weighted higher than other sections. That's not really a good indicator of who's going to be a better operator. So, just on the application side, I'm kind of at the point now where if you're going to have limited licenses, I actually prefer the idea of a qualified lottery, where if you can meet a minimum benchmark, right, a minimum benchmark of competency, you have a chance of getting a license. Even that is problematic, but I think much better than just a straight competitive process these days. The only thing I would say in terms of problems that we see with unlimited licenses under the state-by-state system is what's happened in Oregon and Washington, which has also disadvantaged the small producers in many ways, because you wind up with massive overproduction for a state with a relatively small number of consumers. And so the companies that have the resources to pour into large scale production at scale, driving down costs of production, are able to withstand the downward price compression on the wholesale market, whereas the smaller mom and pops aren't necessarily able to do it. I look at Washington, where we are the number one wholesaler in that state. We saw wholesale pricing go down to about $750 a pound for a high quality indoor pound. That is lower than the cost of production for most of the smaller producers, and a lot of those folks went out of business in the last couple of years. Similar in Oregon. So there is something to be said for potentially some sort of limit, if not on the number of licenses, on the overall canopy size and amount that's allowed to be grown in a state, so that you strike that balance between making sure there's adequate supply and bringing pricing down, but not oversupplying to the point where there's pressure on, potentially pressure on the smaller retailers to essentially send stuff out the back door, which could, bring federal eyes onto businesses that nobody wants. So it's a little challenging. I think when federal legalization comes into play, a lot of this just largely goes away, because if interstate commerce opens up, it doesn't really matter how many licenses there are in a state, right? Because you're not competing with the producers in your state. You're competing with all the producers around the country. The one vestige of the limited license model that I think will likely survive is in retail. And particularly in a lot of the east of the Mississippi states that have a limit on the number of retail licenses. I think that will likely be the basis for what their systems look like post legalization. Again, because states are likely going to have a lot of leeway over who's able to sell it, just like they do with alcohol. And unlike a cultivation facility or a production facility where you can ship, you can just expand your facility and ship more across state lines. The dispensaries are static, right? They're in one location. You can't just up and move your dispensary around just because you want to. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure from the retailers in those limited states to keep keep those limited licenses and keep their positions in the market with limited competition. And so you may very well see the states that have limited licenses for retail keep those in some form post legalization. I think much less of an impact on the cultivation production side.
Really fascinating insights. Thank you so much, Chris. Now, I want to take a minute to appreciate all of our panelists before handing it over back to David. Wanda, Michael, Chris, thank you again so much for your great insights here. Everyone who's listening in will be continuing this conversation at South by Southwest and their digital event this year. So hopefully you'll tune into that. But again, thank you so much for your time, everybody. Let me pass it back over to David to continue the conversation here with Jennifer Lee.
Thanks, Louis, and thanks, Mike and Chris and Wanda. Unbelievable conversation. I'm sure there will be plenty more to talk about. I certainly have another many hours of interesting things to say on the subject. So I'm looking forward to getting more opportunities to share that stuff in the future. We're joined now by Jennifer Lee from Deloitte Canada, who really has some incredible and unique perspective to share about the Canadian market and what their experiences have been like in a country that has already taken the leap past federal legalization. I've been super impressed working with Jennifer Lee and her team at Deloitte Canada, with just the level of knowledge and professionalism and the amount of resources that they're able to bring to business problems to find creative solutions. So Jennifer, thanks for joining us. And,
no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work you do.
Sure. So not for those on the phone who don't know Deloitte, we are a global firm. And the reason I'm here today and from Canada is obviously because when cannabis legalized in Canada, Deloitte Canada was given the permission globally to work on global cannabis assignments. I'm actually a retail consumer specialist in value creation, and I actually stood up the Alberta cannabis business for the government. I worked for the BC government. I also helped in Ontario, New Brunswick, and helped a number of retailers bid on licenses, like big retailers. I also spend quite a bit of time helping global consumer products and CPG companies come into Canada and the US and using Canada as a launch pad. And so come with a significant amount of knowledge just on regulated markets. I spent a good part of my career in alcohol. So I've done pretty much all the vices. I've done gaming and I do retail. So hopefully that background helps. We have a global network of about 250 practitioners that work in the cannabis space. And if you're reading the news in November, Deloitte bought Cannabis Compliance Inc. in Canada. And that the real focus was to bring regulatory expertise to all of our large assignments where we're serving big clients. So David, hopefully that gives you just some background.
Excellent. So having seen what happened in Canada, and this was obviously something that we followed extremely closely at Arcview, what are your thoughts as a Canadian company and someone working with Canadian companies about the biggest effects that federal legalization in Canada had on the cannabis industry at the time?
Yeah. Pre-legalization, what you were seeing was a bubble, really. You saw a lot of private equity, private capital. You saw a lot of speculation entering the industry, and the valuations of a lot of the LPs were just completely unrealistic. And my view, this is my personal view, having worked in the industry now, been in it for almost 5 years, which in dog years is like 40 years. What I saw was a lot of individuals who may not have thought of business fundamentals as being the core value proposition of their business. It was all about, I just want to be a cool product with a cool brand. Doesn't really matter if the founders don't have any experience in business. And depending on where you operated across the country, a lot of people got away with this. What you're seeing now in the post-legalization with 1.0 and then now 2.0, where edibles came into the market, was a much more a focus on core fundamentals of a business. So you're seeing strategics come in, but they're actually vetting now who are the executive team, where's their capital coming from, are they really positioned well in the market, and what's the jump off point to enter the US? So that is the type of thinking that's evolved now in the last couple of years, which I actually think is the right thing, because during the speculation, it was, I think it was irresponsible in many respects with the amount of money that was sloshing around the industry and the way executives were getting paid, and it took away from investing in the business.
Excellent. Did you see a lot of ancillary businesses being impacted by the change in federal legal status in Canada?
Ancillary businesses such as you're talking.
Yeah, the non-plant touching businesses. So the companies operating in the cannabis space that don't grow or sell cannabis.
Well, you saw, as for those following the Canadian market, specifically in Ontario, you got into a lottery system. The government was slightly schizophrenic on how to best give out the licenses, and we're Canadians, so you want everything to be fair, right? And it's very, very hard to do a lottery system, and that's what they discovered very quickly. In Alberta, everyone got a license as long as you could apply for it. So what you saw was, and you saw in markets where there's lotteries, the people made off like bandits, making quite a bit of money in the early lottery days. Now you're seeing retailers have to really drive cost efficiencies. So back in the day, it was just about opening up stores. It wasn't about running an efficient retail business. Now it is all about running an efficient retail business. The market, the ASP, the average selling price of cannabis, is dropping quickly because of overproduction. And so now people are going to have to pick their spots in the market where they want to play. And if cannabis is anything like alcohol, your craft, the brand, the story is very, very important. In a world where you can't market, the big $1 million question is, well, how do you actually get to the consumer and really drive followership, word of mouth, et cetera? And so that's why the retail businesses became very important. You're also seeing extraction businesses. They were at one point really doing well in the market. But as you can see, extract the prices are starting to fall. So now I think the value add that businesses are going to be around well-run businesses with strong product portfolios. And do you have IP that really differentiates you? So you go from a world where retail was hot to now where IP is hot.
Looking at, you mentioned that you acquired Cannabis Compliance Inc. What kinds of things would attract an acquirer like Deloitte to a business like that?
Well, I actually led the acquisition. So we have, as we are an audit business, a tax business, we have a consulting business, advisory that does capital, everything from capital raises to mergers and acquisitions, and a risk business, a risk advisory. One area we didn't have a strength in was actually a very specific cannabis regulatory experience. It's so, as everyone knows here on the phone, the regulations are quite unique. It's not like you can go work in a different industry and easily come to the cannabis industry. So I think that for us, that was a hole that we needed to close. And our investment thesis was also that we were going to use that cannabis compliance to go global. They have expertise in all the countries around the world. So that allowed us as a team to serve all of our global clients out of Canada with the regulatory expertise, because obviously that's your entry point. What makes a company valuable to someone like Deloitte is we need IP that we don't have. So in that case, Cannabis Compliant had very specific IP that we were looking for. The ability to scale the business is also very important. We would never get into cannabis in terms of manufacturing or anything like that, of course, but we have to be able to serve clients at all sizes. So we knew Canopy when they were just a small baby company, all the way up till now when the deal with Constellation happened. We have a business that can work with small companies all the way up to large. So that's the way we think about our business. So anyone we are going to acquire is what part of the market would they serve? Do we currently serve it? Do we have a hole there? And can they actually meet the Deloitte standards of professionalism and ethics and independence and all of that comes with being with a big firm?
What lessons do you think the United States can learn from the legalization process in Canada, and how do you think the United States might be significantly different from what happened in Canada?
Yeah, good question. What can you learn? Well, it depends if you're in the business for the long term or the short term. Like it's your time horizon, right? So people who came into cannabis in Canada, there were a significant portion of the market came in just to exit quickly. So it was a very speculative market, short-term thinking. The people who are thinking long-term, which could be a lot more of the people here on this call, who are really investing in the businesses, trying to build their businesses, you have to stick to your knitting. And you got to really start building strong business fundamentals. You can often get tempted by capital. That's what the Canadian story was very much about. And the people left behind are the people who actually want to run, strong businesses with strong business fundamentals. So I think you got to decide who you want to be. Of course, everyone wants to make money and just run off, but not everyone feels that way. They want to go and build sustainable businesses that make a real difference and conserve the market. So that to me it would be my biggest piece of advice is don't get too distracted. At the end of the day, it's very, very important to make the business viable. And I heard earlier that it was harder to get capital. That is going to be the biggest challenge. But when you're federally legal, you don't have that issue in getting capital. So you're going to have the opposite effect where everyone's offering you capital. So then you're going to have to make very, very clear choices. I would also say, and this is me being biased because I've now lived through it, choose who your advisors are. Your advisors matter because that's how people take you seriously. Who's advising your strategy, your tax, your audit, your regulatory, your legal, whatever the group of advisors are, get them early, build a relationship because they actually bring legitimacy to your business. And so that is why we decided to enter the game because we could help bring legitimacy to the industry. We could help bring the right advice that was needed. And there are a lot of clients that we said, you know what, our values don't align. We can't work with you, right? Because I'm not going to advise somebody that where you're giving advice and they have a whole different value system.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think U.S. federal legalization might affect the Canadian cannabis landscape?
Well, we're already seeing it. The majority of my assignments I'm working on right now are global companies coming into Canada, but using it as a jump off point to the US, which is what I mentioned earlier. So I think you're going to see now companies either exercising their options where they've made investments in Canada and they're looking for pathways into the US. So that's one. I think second, you're going to start seeing capital from Canada head down to the US as they start to look at all the different operating models. Who are they going to acquire? And you're already seeing it already. Who can we merge with? How do we consolidate the industry? So I think you're now seeing a lot of investment theses roll out, and you're already seeing a lot of private capital enter the market, like private wealth in the US. So that means that the Canadian market doesn't get access to capital as easily. But there's a lot of strategic partnerships that are now forming because they're getting ready. So those are probably the two big moves that I'd say I see now that Biden's moved into the administration.
Excellent. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with folks?
No, I think that one of the big topics that you and I have spoken about, David, is this discussion around trust. You asked me what I've learned from working in the industry is everything I just talked about, but more importantly, how does an industry organize itself so it's a trusted industry? And I think that was a misstep in Canada to a large degree. Was they didn't get together soon enough and really set out the guidelines of operating in an industry. If you want to be taken seriously, you have to have the same standards of professionalization, the same rigor that other industries have. Then you can capture the attention of government. I think we went through a wave of founders in Canada, and the behavior really drove mistrust as a result, right? And so now the industry wants to be taken seriously, and it's harder to do that. So I would, if I were in everyone's shoes here on the phone, I'd be spending time thinking through, like, how do you assemble as an industry? How do you be trusted? What is the equation of trust for us in order to get heard?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. That was fantastic as always, and thanks for taking the time to join us.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So that gets us pretty much to the end of this program. You'll notice that a little survey popped up on your screen. So if you can take a moment to just fill out that survey, that would be fantastic. It really gives us a lot of information that helps us create better programming and give you what you're looking for. You'll also see the Arcview ecosystem up on the screen, and I'd like to draw your attention to the various ways in which Arcview might be able to help you or your business in the cannabis space. I help run Arcview Consulting, and we work with clients on strategy, looking at all sorts of issues from how to position themselves for federal legalization, notably, to how to grow and how to expand into new markets. We help clients in adult use and medical cannabis, as well as CBD and industrial hemp and ESG. We've also got Arcview Ventures, which is a member-managed venture fund placing capital in the space. Arcview Capital, our FINRA-licensed broker-dealer, helping companies raise money, and Arcview's Women Inclusion Network, which I'm sure many of you are members of, which has all sorts of fantastic resources and programming to help promote participation of women in the industry, as well as Arcview Market Research, where we publish reports and all sorts of great thought leadership to help you make sense of what's happening in the industry. I think that about wraps it up. We've got several things coming up. We've got a town hall looking at what's next for Arizona. That'll be Thursday, February 4th at 11 a.m. Pacific. And then we've also got a webinar for a series of white papers that we are co-publishing with NCIA around creating gender parity in the cannabis industry. It's really a fantastic set of white papers authored by some incredible women in the cannabis industry. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that conversation, which will be Friday, February 5th also at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So with that, thank you for joining us. Please, if you think Arcview might be able to help you on your cannabis journey, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And given today's topic especially, if you would like our help looking into how your business might be positioned for federal legalization, that's a big focus of what we're doing with clients this year, helping to understand how the various plausible federal legalization frameworks might affect their business, who potential acquirers might be if those companies are interested in an exit, and how to really scale or position themselves to take advantages of the opportunities that are likely to come with federal legalization and mitigate the risks that are going to be very real for a lot of businesses. Thank you very much, and have a lovely rest of your day.